Sunlight is shining right on my body. The divinity is reaching me. By the way, I've never noticed how much this shirt matches my background color aesthetic. I feel like I should wear this shirt more often in videos because I like a good color motif. I like that consistency. So guys, today I want to talk about I'm Glad My Mom Died, this new memoir by Jennette McCurdy. You might have heard about it. She's done a lot of press for it. It's been selling, I believe it actually sold out and then they had to reprint it. So good for her that she's finding this second life as a writer and finding success with it. If you don't know who Jennette McCurdy is, she is best known for having been a child actress. She's probably around my age, but when she was a teenager, she was on the hit show iCarly on Nickelodeon. That's what she's most known for. Then she did another show on Nickelodeon with Ariana Grande. It's a little bit after my childhood, I would say the generation after mine. My little brother grew up watching iCarly, so I remember seeing her on TV. And it's just so interesting how, the grass is always greener. Typical story of you see this kid actor on TV and you're like, wow, good for them. Like, they're wealthy, self-made, living this dream that's so many people's dream, including, grown adults have that dream of breaking through Hollywood, or breaking into Hollywood and finding success. And here she is, 12, 14, 16, living this dream, but it was never actually her dream. And she chronicles that in her book about basically all the nightmares she was dealing with at that time, a very tumultuous, toxic relationship with her mother, being in an industry that she didn't even want to be in, that gave her all this anxiety and body image issues. Very poignant autobiography and story. And they say don't judge a book by its cover. You can definitely judge this book by its cover, because this cover is exactly representative of the content of the book. She is witty, she has a lot of dry humor, she's very blunt, direct, and these are dark themes, so why not coat it in dark humor to make it at least a little bit lighter and less, I guess, triggering to read through. And even me reading it, certain things were very triggering, whether it's stuff that reminded me of my own family relationships or even just as a gay person, right? I always try with this channel to connect it back to gay themes and gay stories. And even though this is not at all a gay memoir, one of the things I took away from it was relating to her feeling of, I don't think she ever used this word in the book, but feeling so isolated and so disconnected. And again, ironic, right, that she was this child star, so she has all these fans, that she's a public figure. When she's on set, she's surrounded by people, she's in Hollywood, but clearly she was so isolated in terms of the mental health struggles she was going through and the shame of that keeping her sort of sequestered and in her own bubble, right? And I think, at least for me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys relate to this, growing up as a gay kid, that is so prevalent, right? That you're going through all these adult themes and ruminating all these things in your head already. And I feel like, the kids around me were just enjoying their childhoods and just being free and not overthinking anything. And meanwhile, I'm already like, considering all these like heavy topics of like, am I going to grow up and get HIV? Am I, what is my life going to look like? Am I ever going to be able to talk about this? And so I related to her regarding that aspect. And there were a lot of actually very, again, relatable, triggering things. And she does a really good job at being honest about it, being very candid, and expressing how she is still working through these things. So in that sense, it's a very modern memoir, even though the themes are not that modern, right? Like eating disorders, body image issues, generational trauma, toxic relationships. Like this is something these are things that have always existed, but her take on it, her spin on it, and her recognizing the awareness, the waking up to the realities of these issues, and that she needs to do the work to have a better life. Like that for me is the takeaway and the modern part of the story. That's the whole point of the book, why she calls it I'm Glad My Mom Died, because it took her mom's death for her to fully come to terms with the toxic relationship with her mother as a toxic person in her life and starting to unwrap what that means for her. One thing that was ironic to me in the book is that her mom was living vicariously through her. It was her mom's dream to be a child actress, or just to be an actress in general. That didn't happen. She had kids really young. Her life was just a total clusterfuck. She's a hoarder. She is obsessive. She has her own eating issues. She treats her husband horribly. Like there's all these different facets to her. So what does she do? She has this daughter, Jeanette, and she basically pushes these dreams onto Jeanette. She basically, through a self-fulfilling prophecy of just forcing it to happen, turns Jeanette into a child actress, and then she lives vicariously through her daughter having all this success. And then, of course, feeds off of her, right? Like, Jeanette becomes the breadwinner of the family. Everybody's now taken care of financially. Suddenly, they don't have to struggle anymore. So ironically, Jeanette is also living vicariously through her mother because she never actually wants to be an actress. And again, these are things she realizes as she gets older, and the resentment starts to settle in of like, I didn't even actually choose this life. Like, this was kind of forced upon me. But because she has this really unhealthy codependent relationship with her mother, she ends up also living through her mother's validation. And so there's this almost like parasite-like relationship that they both have with each other, where they're feeding off of each other's identities to survive. And obviously her mother is to blame for that, right? I mean, when you're a child, you're just living through example. You're modeling after that example. Perfect example of this is the eating habit. So by the time Jeanette is like 10 or 12, her mother starts enforcing calorie restriction onto her. And the most disturbing part of that is there are people around, doctors, other mothers in the neighborhood or whatever of friends of Jeanette's, who point out like, hey, we think your daughter might have issues with eating, and her mother completely ignores it and appeases them and is like, oh, no, we're fine, don't worry about it, even though it's her mother doing it. So they're trying to help, trying to raise these red flags to the mother, thinking maybe she's not aware that Jeanette is really, really thin for her age and all these things. But really, it's the mother who's responsible, and she's turning these people away who are trying to help. So she knows exactly what she's doing, and I'm assuming that she was driven both by the desire to control her daughter, but also I think it's a form of securing this career for her daughter in Hollywood so that the money doesn't dry up and the family's not screwed over. So it's really compelling, right? Because on the one hand, a part of me, and I think Jeanette probably feels the same way, I'm assuming, on the one hand, I give it to her mom, like I credit her with like, wow, to be that fucked up as a person, it's interesting that she could still be so crafty and so strategic to basically create a career for her daughter out of nowhere. Like against all odds, she made this happen for her. I mean, you could say the same about somebody like Joe Jackson, right? Father of Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5. This idea that these toxic people, at least I'll give this to them, like to be that driven, like we're gonna find a way to make this happen, even if it means screwing up my children's mental health. I'm like kind of stunned by that ability and that power. What I really appreciated about the book, which again I think is linked to her modern approach of these heavy themes, is her expressing how much of this is gray area. Toxic relationships, difficult relationships, abusive relationships, because it's so easy to be black and white and say, oh, well, this person's bad for you, this person's not a good person in your life, keep them away, I hate this person, blah, blah, blah. But she's very clear throughout the book of expressing her love for her mother. And on the last page, she conveys this so well. And this really sums up, I think, the book so well and the complexity of having a relationship like this with her mom. She says, I miss her pep talks. I miss her childlike spirit. Mom had an energy that could at times be so endearing, even captivating, and I miss when she was happy. Sometimes when I miss her, I start to fantasize about what life would be like if she were still alive. But then I realize I'm just romanticizing the dead in the same way I wish everyone else wouldn't. Mom made it very clear that she had no interest in changing. If she were still alive, she'd still be trying her best to manipulate me into being who she wants me to be. So I thought that was such a great way of expressing that complexity of she still misses her mom. It's still like a vacancy in her, like this void, but she also recognizes that she's glad her mom died because it took that happening for her to work towards a freedom from that generational trauma and that abuse that was inflicted on her from birth, basically. It's a really moving, emotional memoir. I highly recommend it, if nothing else, because it'll probably make you think about your own childhood the way it made me think about mine, and you consider certain things that you're like, yeah, that XYZ really wasn't that normal. And it's okay that I went through something abnormal and uncomfortable and that I'm aware of it. Definitely, again, trigger warning. For some people, this might be very difficult to get through. It might be too relatable, but otherwise, I recommend it. I think it's important for today's era. I think the last 5 years or so, there have been so many movements of awakening between the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. I feel like a lot of uncomfortable conversations are happening, and I think one like this, somebody saying, I'm glad my mom died and here's why, here's my story. I think it's so important for people to share this, not just for their own therapeutic reasons, but because there's always something for everybody else to learn from that. And in this case, talking about bringing children into the world, I feel like parents have to be so acutely aware of what they're projecting onto their kids that they might not even be consciously aware that they're doing, but that is repeating these really, really toxic cycles. So I recommend it. If you guys have read it or you're curious about reading it, definitely leave a comment below. Would love to see what you guys think.